The first release of NBA Jam came out as an arcade cabinet in 1993. The game was both developed and published by Midway. Prior to NBA Jam's release, the main designer and programmer Mark Turmel made other Midway sports games such as Arch Rivals and High Impact. NBA Jam is a spiritual successor to Arch Rivals as it's also a 2-on-2 basketball game. NBA Jam quickly became popular and became one of the highest earning arcade machines of all time. The game spawned an entire genre of sports games that are more arcadey and exaggerated than realistic. Midway would later use this concept to create NFL Blitz. NBA Jam was also one of the earliest basketball games to feature real NBA teams and players, with a digitized likeness of each player in the game. After the surge of popularity of the game, Midway ported the arcade game to home consoles the following year in 1993. On March 4th, 1994, the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis versions of the game were released. NBA Jam is a 2-on-2 basketball game with fast-paced gameplay and really easy-to-learn controls. The game is more of a slam dunk game than it is a basketball game. Many of the violations in real NBA basketball are foregone here. For instance, there's no fouls, free throws, or violations of any kind except for goaltending and shot clock violations. The game has fairly simple controls mostly based around the use of a turbo button. While holding the turbo button, it modifies certain abilities, like instead of trying to swipe the ball from the other team while playing on defense, instead you'll push players over. Or when playing offense, instead of just shooting the ball, if you're within range to perform a slam dunk, you will. Aside from the turbo buttons, there's two other buttons used. On defense, you can swipe the ball or jump to block the shot in air. While playing offense, you can shoot or pass. The extremely simple controls make this game awesome for anyone to pick up and play because it's so easy to learn. NBA Jam has a really good sense of humor about itself, packing a number of Easter eggs into the game. These special features are activated by inserting initials and button combinations in at the beginning of each match. Special features could include hidden characters like Bill Clinton or team mascots, or modifiers to the game like super clean floor mode, which makes it so players fall if they move too fast. The gameplay is extremely fast-paced, and an entire match can be finished in less than 15 minutes, which is awesome because many sports games can drone on longer than they should. The arcadey 2-on-2 gameplay makes this basketball game way easier to get into than most basketball games. Perhaps the coolest thing about NBA Jam are all the various massive dunks you're able to perform and the announcer with his catchphrases. There's a few standard layups and dunks that you'll do when going to the basket, but if you use the turbo button and trigger the shot at the right time, you'll go flying into the air and perform a massive dunk. While these huge dunks don't really affect your score, it adds a ton of style to the game that many other basketball titles lack. The game also has an on fire system, where if you make 3 shots in a row without the other team scoring, you become on fire, which drastically upgrades your ability to make baskets, as well as allows you to perform the most ridiculous dunks in the game. NBA Jam has this certain fast-paced feel about it that makes it extremely fun and will make you want to start up another game right after the one you just played. Although, this isn't necessarily the case with all of the console versions of the game released. The SegaCD version runs a lot slower than the Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis versions, and you also have drastically slower movement when moving diagonally compared to the other console versions. The SegaCD version is also crippled with load times, which aside from making you wait, completely takes you out of the action between quarters. The only real payoff to the SegaCD version is that it has better audio and a few FMV scenes, however, it's not worth the load times. The Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo versions are extremely similar in gameplay and graphics. The only real difference between these versions is the audio quality, which the Super Nintendo wins in. This is mainly because the announcer sounds pretty bad running through the Genesis sound chip. The music on the Genesis also sounds worse, being a lot more simple and bassy. You really can't go wrong with either version, but the Super Nintendo version is the most complete package of any of the home console ports of the game. A year after the release of NBA Jam on home consoles, an updated version of the game called Tournament Edition was released in February of 1995. This version of the game updated the game's rosters and included a number of new Easter eggs and music, however the gameplay remained mostly the same. Rather than having 2-player rosters like in the original, Tournament Edition allows you to choose 2 players from a 3-player roster. In 1998, NBA Jam's lead designer Mark Turmel confirmed a long-held suspicion that the game was biased against the Chicago Bulls. As a Detroit Pistons fan, Turmel programmed the game so that the Bulls would miss last-second shots in close games against the Pistons. Graphically, the game looked great at the time, and has aged pretty well. The dunk animations are still cool as ever, and on the rare occasion you break the backboard, it still looks awesome. While the game can't compete artistically with something like a Square game, it still does a great job of getting the point across, and looks better than most of the NBA Jam clones that would come out in the following years. The game's soundtrack is pretty awesome. The tracks are fast-paced with some shredding guitar and some really cool synths. Well, except for the Genesis version, which has mostly the same music, it's just drastically more muddy. On the Super Nintendo version, the music really only plays during the menus, so you might want to throw on some of your own music while playing the rounds, but the Genesis version has music during the matches, although it's not very good. During the actual matches, the game's sound effects are pretty good as well. One of the most memorable parts of the game is the announcer, who will make comments throughout the matches. His comments are funny and awesome, and have had an impact on popular culture, coining the phrases, "He's heating up," "He's on fire," and "Boom shakalaka laka." The announcer actually adds a lot to the game's audio as well as to the game itself. Overall, NBA Jam is quite possibly the best basketball game ever made. The game can be learned within minutes, however enjoyed for countless hours. Between the original version and the Tournament Edition, the game was ported to 8 consoles, so chances are if you own a 16-bit or 32-bit console, you're able to play this game, although the original version is the best to play off cartridge. NBA Jam is a game that I always go back to, and it's always a blast to play with friends. NBA Jam is timeless and one of the most culturally influential arcade games in the 90s, and is totally worth checking out if you've never played it, even if you don't have any interest in basketball.